Show tunes with lyrics where skill never wobbles, no wrong emphasis on errant syllables, lively discussions of songs, queens and kings. This is the podcast my favourite sings. Rather than dissing what Broadway's rewarding, I'll give a listen to Goldsmith and Gordon. They'll dissect musicals, arrows and slings. Here on the podcast my favourite sings. When the show bites, when the rhymes suck, when the crafts regressed, I go to the podcast my favourite sings, where David and Paul know best.
Hey, buddy.
Hey, so you got to see Brianna yesterday.
Yeah, I got to hang out with your wife.
Set you
I always
straight
enjoy
on.
hanging with I always enjoy hanging out with your wife without you. So,
Yeah.
what did you ask?
Yeah, I enjoy hanging out with my wife without you too.
Uh,
I said, did she? Yeah, did she say? I am. Did she say anything to set you straight about life?
I mean, I thought you were going to ask if she said anything nice about you. And
No, I already
I
know.
really can't reveal what we talked about.
Yeah,
So,
it's the
I
answer.
just want our podcast listeners to know, that we're such good friends that I have private conversations with your wife.
Our lives are an open book.
So, I thought today I wanted to jump in because I just watched A Complete Unknown, the Dylan movie.
Oh,
And since, we talk about lyrics and music on this podcast, I was really struck by Dylan. Dylan has never been my, you know, I've always appreciated him. He's never been my favorite. I prefer Paul Simon, Joni Mitchell in that genre, but I obviously think Dylan is a genius. And it was really interesting because the movie covers the first part of his career. And it's so interesting, both musically and lyrically, his early work, these bursts of inspiration that he had, where the movie doesn't talk about it, but I've read interviews where he was channeling these songs. He didn't even know where they were coming from. They were just coming. And what I found interesting, that you haven't seen the film yet,
not all.
correct?
No, I've seen like the first 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah. I actually cried 5 times during the first 20 minutes, but that might because I'm off my meds. But I also found it really emotional, his connection with Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger, and how their their work influenced him, but how he took their work and actually took it to the next level. And he definitely took it to the next level lyrically. And he was just really a lot of train of thought lyrics. But I was curious what you think of Dylan's early work, and especially when I was watching the film and listening to songs that I was familiar with but I hadn't heard in a while. Of course, the false rhymes were jumping out at me, but they were jumping out at me in a way where they just worked so well because, last week we talked about our brain and how it doesn't necessarily, you know, we don't consciously recognize, oh, that's a true rhyme, that's a false rhyme, but our brain does. And yet I was finding in Dylan's music and in the way he constructed his vocals and his lyrics that it really, his false rhymes, and I think this is probably true in Hamilton as well, is that they just sing. They sing in a particular way. I mean, if you look at some of the lyrics, he does rhyme words with the same word and so forth. Not the best thing to do, but mostly it's highly inspirational and highly creative. And he was doing something brand new. And what the thought that led me to is because I think what his work was in pop music was groundbreaking. And then that led me to the thought in musicals, what are really the groundbreaking musicals that have influenced you and me? I mean, there's of course a lot of the golden age musicals that were groundbreaking, but I thought we'd start and I'll just tell you some of mine, and you can see if anything occurs to you or what you think. But the three musicals that came up for me in my world as groundbreaking, that these three musicals have nothing like it had ever been done before. And for me, it was Chorus Line, Company, and Hamilton were the three musicals that no musical before it was ever like this musical. They did something brand new. Chorus Line took something that wasn't even a story and just the life of these individual people. And all they had was a premise. Who's going to get the job? It was just a through line. And then it was just the emotionality and the connection to the actors and their stories with one of the most incredible scores written for a Broadway show, with maybe arguably our greatest musical theater director choreographer, Michael Bennett. And Company, obviously, for so many reasons, Stephen Sondheim. But this is the Stephen Sondheim show that broke ground. Musically, I feel he potentially broke ground before this, but in terms of a musical, and actually, there's a thread with Chorus Line in a sense, but this is completely different. And there had never been anything like it, and certainly never have been a score like it before. And it was completely unique and brilliant. So I guess I'm going for unique and brilliant and groundbreaking and brilliant. And then, of course, Hamilton, we don't have to talk about. It's been talked about a lot. But for obvious reasons, I feel Hamilton is groundbreaking and did something that no show had ever done before in a particular way that was very successful. So I thought we'd start off just talking about groundbreaking musicals and inspiration.
Well, sure. I think where I go when you ask me what, and I hadn't thought about, well, what are my three groundbreaking musicals, or my three most, I would say, influential to me. To me, they start at the apotheosis of the form as opposed to the one that broke new ground, because a lot of times you can break new ground and there's no template for what follows. I think Hamilton is a very good example of that. Hamilton is singular. There's what he did there. No one's done it again in 10 years. It didn't set a framework that anybody really is building on. So it's a one-off to me.
Can I interject? Because
Sure.
I've seen several shows lately that sound like Hamilton, that like, hi, I'm writing songs that feel like they should be in Hamilton, except they're in this different show.
Right, but those shows aren't going to make anybody's list of the most influential or the most groundbreaking. And that's
Right. But I
what
would,
we're talking about.
right. Yeah. I mean, maybe it's semantical because, I don't think there's been a show like A Chorus Line since, but it was completely groundbreaking. There are shows that tried to be Chorus Line. I would say Hands on a Hard Body, which I never saw, which I wanted to write. But from what I know about the show, like, yeah, that was a Chorus Line model. There's one through line, and everybody's it's just an opportunity for people to tell their stories.
Fourth Line is a bit of a one-off as well. I would say I admired both shows. I don't feel like they're the shows that influenced me. The shows that influenced me were the ones that got all of the elements that have been worked on for so long together in one shining moment, like Gypsy.
Yeah. Well, I want to be clear. These three shows are not the shows that inspired me most. These are the shows that I feel are the most groundbreaking, that nothing like these shows have come before it. And as you're arguing, perhaps after it, because maybe nothing has been like Company either. Well, certainly nothing, truly
No.
successful.
Right. So for me, there's limited use in I mean, I'm grateful that there was a, you know, a well, I'm trying to think of, you know, when I've thought of this. You know, I'm thinking of Adam Gettle right now. Like I'm thinking of, you know, Floyd Collins and Light in the Piazza. There's really only been, and this is not a ding on Adam Gettle at all. It's just, you know, there's no one's building off of that sound or off of that use of.
Well, that's interesting because I will disagree with you again. Um, the other thing that I wanted to talk about a bit was inspiration, because I totally agree with you. You know, groundbreaking and what inspired me to do the work. Of the three shows I mentioned, even though Company is mind-blowing, the score, only a chorus line was mind-blowing to me in terms of inspiration. Oh my God, this is maybe the greatest musical I've ever seen. And I never saw a production of Company till the recent Broadway version, which is not the original Company. So, but I think it's interesting that you're talking about Adam Gettle because I've chosen four songs that I feel were so inspirational to me musically. And, you know, I'm curious to get your thoughts musically and lyrically on these shows, but we'll just start with Adam Gettle because the first song that I just feel just inspires me musically and makes me want to write is the song Light in the Piazza,
Mhm.
which is not a song that has a typical song form that we've talked about before. Adam goes off in his own world musically, which I appreciate, and I think you appreciate a little less. And Light in the Piazza, the song goes a lot of different places, but where it ultimately goes is in my heart. It ultimately, the music, I feel it right here. I feel it every time. It brings me close to tears every time I hear it. And it's very rare that music can do that. Because, you know, as we know, music is so powerful. Classical music for years, people didn't need lyrics because the music told them everything that the composer wanted them to know. And I think we have some composers in our musical theater that have that skill, and certainly Adam has it. So Light in the Piazza for me, that song is life changing. By the way, I'm just doing non-Stephen Sondheim
Oh,
composers right now.
sure. That's
I just
tricky. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
hard.
So I just have three more. Omar Sharif,
Yeah.
a song we've talked about from the band's visit. You know, obviously, this is a lyrical masterpiece, but it is a musical masterpiece. It is a song that I never get tired of hearing, that I discover something new musically every time I hear the song. And it affects me the same way. And that is the true gift of a song. It's not always necessarily the right call for musical theater. Like in musical theater, you want to hear music the first time. We don't have, you know, we have reprises, but you want to kind of get it the first time. And not all these songs are like that. So there possibly you could give a critique of these songs for being in a musical because the first time somebody without sophisticated ears hears the song Light in the Piazza, they may not get it. And in fact, it took me a few times to listen to it before I fully appreciated it musically. Um, Cassandra, Jason Robert Brown, from The Connector. We discussed last week, and you went into great detail the brilliance of this lyric. It is just next level lyrically.
Well, the other thing about Cassandra is the fact that it was written by a man and so beautifully captures a female's perspective, a woman's perspective of being unseen as a woman, and just his ability to have gotten inside all of that, just not just emotionally, but you know, politically and sociologically, um, and then of course just the form of it, um, the the structure of it, the the order of it. it's really quite an achievement. I agree.
It's mind blowing.
Yeah.
So I picked this one. I could pick a lot of Jason songs, but I picked this one. Just, it's new and
Yeah.
I'm listening to it a lot. It's just musically, it's a musical masterpiece. It's just astounding to me musically, as many of Jason's songs are, and it's certainly many songs on the Connector are. So I just think, he's in top form musically. Again, you can listen to the song 50 times and discover new things. And then I wonder how, modern audiences, average audiences that are used to listening to top 40, how their ears are going to assimilate
Yeah, I wonder
Cassandra.
that too. Yeah, I wonder that too.
Which is the Achilles heel of our industry, because I am clearly in support of more sophisticated music, melodic sophisticated music, which I think Jason and all these composers do well. And then the last song I'm going to mention is from Maybe Happy Ending,
Hmm.
and is What I Learned from People. And this is where I slightly disagree with you. I think Adam has a tremendous influence on some composers. He certainly has a tremendous influence on me. And I hear this song, and I could be totally wrong, is very influenced by Adam, very influenced by, where he goes melodically and harmonically. At least I hear Adam's influence in this song, but it's very much them. It is an original song. It's a beautiful song. Ironically, I've been mostly listening to it in Korean
Yeah,
because the music is so rich that
that's all that's available really right
oh,
now.
you love it when I say this, David. I don't even need to hear the lyrics
Yeah.
because the music thrills me so much. I'm just good. But I know I'm going to start listening to the original Broadway cast recording that I haven't listened to yet and
I don't think
start
it's
listening.
come out yet, has it? I don't think
I
they've.
think it just came out
Oh,
because
did it? Okay.
when I was getting ready for this podcast, I got up Maybe Happy Ending to check the title of the song, and then I saw that the original cast recording has.
All of
And
it.
anybody listening to the podcast, please go see Maybe Happy Ending. Listen to the music. It's so great. I love it.
Yeah, definitely support Maybe Happy Ending. It's good stuff. And I think interestingly, I think Maybe Happy Ending has applications to that are accessible, like in terms of like let's build from here. In a way that I think Hamilton is elusive, and I think Chorus Line is elusive. Um, that Band's Visit is not elusive. Like Band's Visit also to me has applications for here's a template for, you can apply here we have a particular sound from a particular region. Here's how we can
Right.
here's how we can filter that through a Broadway musical lens. I want to
Yeah.
say that Omar Sharif is yeah, I it is one of those songs that I go back to and it does make me cry um, pretty much every time. It's the actually interesting story about Omar Sharif um, is I'm pretty sure I'm getting these details right. Uh, David Yazbek will email you that I'm wrong, but the story goes that it had been cut when they were trying to find the show at a certain point for about 8 months, maybe longer, and usually when you cut something, as you don't miss it. You don't think about it after you've cut it. You're basically moving forward to sculpt
Yeah.
the show. And it's like if you cut a piece of marble off, it's a piece of marble that's sitting on that you've thrown away and you don't think about it anymore. But this particular piece of marble, after almost 8 months or maybe closer to a year, David Yazbek said, I think that Omar Sharif song maybe we should look at that again. Maybe we need to have that, because I can understand, as you said, it stops the action cold. It's just basically it's a character singing about something, in her past that is not technically moving the story forward and what we would just, think of as, traditionally narrative. You want to have the narrative driving forward way. But it becomes the centerpiece emotionally of the entire show. It is the landing point of the show. In fact, it's this one song that they do on the Tonys, and to imagine the Band's Visit without Omar Sharif is to imagine how a man walks around without a heart.
Yeah, that's a very good line, David. Yeah, I think you raise a really great point because, the reason that Omar Sharif works so well on that show, and the reason why another song in another show might not work as well there, is because we care so much about this character at this point in the show. So she can stop and sing about herself. That does not stop the story to me. As we've discussed so often in musicals, uh, characters will stop and sing about themselves and stop the story because we don't care about this character enough to know more about them other than some lines of dialogue or some exposition. I think it's so important in musicals to know when the right moment is for a character to stop the storytelling. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am, to give you a little more juice about who I am. And when you have a song like Omar Sharif, it completely lifts up the show in an incredible way. Now, here's a character who sings the same kind of song that is a secondary character, and yet somehow it works incredibly well. A, because it's one of the greatest songs ever written, and B, because the book writer wrote every character brilliantly. And it's Petra's song, The Miller's Son in A Little Night Music, which is a secondary character, you know, doesn't have a lot to do in the show, and yet sings one of the most important, like probably one of the second most well-known song of the show. And and it's a big song, and it's just Petra. And she's just, she's more of a
So
plot point than
yeah,
a character, but it absolutely works for reasons that maybe I can't even articulate.
so let me see if I can parse how Omar Sharif functions and how the Miller song functions because I think they're different. I do think they're different.
Well, they're different because one character is a lead character and the other character is not. And usually the Miller son will never work in any other show. But because it's Sondheim and Hugh Wheeler, they made it work. And you can explain why it works.
Well, I think it goes deeper to me than just that, you know, is it Dina? Is that the name? Is that the name of the character in Band's Visit?
Oh, I don't remember. Sorry. But that sounds right.
The Katrina Link role. The lead role in Band's Visit is singing Omar Sharif, and a tertiary character in Night Music is singing um, Miller's Son. One thing that I think is a rule of thumb in a song like Omar Sharif, and the reason other than it's a beautiful piece of material musically and lyrically, um, but it doesn't in its lyrics it doesn't move anything forward, but dramatically it actually is moving something forward, and that is what we care about in the show, which is the relationship between um oh gosh, their names. Uh,
Henrik.
no, I'm in
Uh,
now. I'm in Band's Visit now.
oh, you're in the dance. Hi, I'm in the wrong show.
Yeah. And by the way, in Night Music, it's Petra and Frid, two servants, is their names,
And by the way, Frid had a song
called
that
Silly
they
People.
cut, thank God, Silly People, which I actually think is one of the weakest songs Stephen Sondheim has ever written.
It is
I
weak.
cannot hear that melody. I don't know what that melody is, but I'm glad they cut it.
I'm doing a quick Google search for Band's Visit character names so that I don't screw that up. Um,
David, this is a
Dina.
podcast. People Google the names themselves.
No, I,
We
I
don't
was right
have to.
though. It is Dina. I was right. Um, so it's Dina and Tufik are their names. Um, and or Tufik. And we are rooting for them. So when we hear Omar Sharif, what we're actually watching is we're watching a relationship find itself. We're watching two people try to try to bridge a historical ancestral divide, and how they do that is through this memory that she's bringing up that bridges both their cultures. Kulthum of the Egyptian culture and Omar Sharif, or Kulthum of her culture and Omar Sharif of his, and so what we're actually seeing is them finding a way to come together in that song, and so the narrative is actually without on the surface expressing any of the usual kind of sentiments that we would hear in a lyric about whether they would be, speaking about how can we, imagine the bad version of this moment in this diner. The bad version of this moment is, how can we possibly be together when you are from Egypt and I am from Israel? That, you know what I mean? There'd be some version of
That's
that.
a pretty good lyric, David.
Yeah,
You
thanks.
should send that to me.
I will see if they can do a rewrite. But in less experienced, less mature hands, it would be some prosaic version of how do we express on the surface what the subtext is. But what he's done here, and I mean, it's the construct of the band's visit really that comes from the source material. The movie has this, where no one ever really speaks the subtext on the surface. Everyone is in the situation and just speaking as they would on an ordinary day. And
Right. And
and
as we've discussed,
we're watching levels, which I think are always important to have in a musical. If everything is just existing on a flat two-dimensional level, it's not interesting. And music isn't is asked then, or performances are asked then to create the levels where they don't exist in the writing. And they need to be bouncing off each other and reflecting off of each other from the book level, the lyric level, the metaphorical level, the poetic level, the distinction between words and lyrics, which when you talk about Dylan, is where I go, because just to talk about that for a moment, Dylan's words.
get to Dylan, before we get back to Dylan,
Sure.
I still want you to answer my question, because we've definitely figured out 5 reasons why Omar Sharif works. It absolutely works. Why does the Miller Son work?
Well, first of all, you could argue that it probably doesn't universally work as easily and as well as Omar Sharif does, but let's stipulate that it does work. The Miller Son is an example of virtuosity on a level.
Overtake whether you care about the character, because
It's
that's what I think the song is so astounding, and the character of Petra is very likable. Let me just say that she's not a main character, but we like her. She teases Frederick. She's funny. She's smart. She's the one that's in control, so we like her. That's why I think the song can work. It's just odd in a musical, but and we can talk about this another time. The musical Little Night Music, which is my favorite musical, is a very odd musical. The way it's constructed, the way the music works, how few songs there are in Act Two, and how the music is used, and how many reprises, and Sondheim's uses of reprises in a Little Night Music has such an influence on me, because he just kept weaving those amazing melodies back in. But I want to jump to something else that you said, because and I do want to come back to Dylan, and I want to forget, but I also don't want to forget we were talking about maybe happy ending. And we were talking about the idea that, will there be another show like these unique shows? Will there be another Hamilton? Will there be another Chorus Line? So what I think maybe happy ending is that it is a mystery box show. And I think that this term is going to be a term that we're going to talk about more in theater. We're talking about it in film and TV a bit. Severance is a mystery box television show. Finian's Rainbow is a mystery box musical. Maybe Happy Ending is a mystery box musical. I'm actually trying to think of some others. I love this genre. I have written a few mystery box musicals, and I do think that this is going to be a new genre that's going to emerge in theater. And I think and I'm happy for it to emerge because maybe it will mean we're doing less movies
Oh,
and
sure.
we're
I mean,
doing more.
I'm happy with mystery box musicals as long as they are good stories, well told, with well crafted music and lyrics. Like to me, that's why I'm going. And so, like when you talk about a little night music, for me, a little night music is it's taken from a film that is narratively very solidly structured, and it basically grafts that story structure into the musical. So the reason, Sondheim is using more reprises and less new songs in the second act is because of just the way the narrative, what the narrative needs to address, and what the narrative is driving the score, as opposed to the score is driving the narrative or the mystery is driving the narrative. It's just like there's a narrative. We've set up these characters, now later soon, and now we're going to see what they do. And to me, that's one of the joys of a little night music, is that it's just a very good story, very well told, with perfectly crafted music and lyrics. And to get back to The Miller's Son, it's a departure in that you could cut it from the show and not miss it, not narratively. There's no reason
Well,
you.
you'd miss it, but no, you could cut it from the show, and the show works the same way if you've never seen the show or never heard the song,
But
because
as
the song is not
it's not
the
necessary.
storytelling.
But what you're witnessing is virtuosic music, lyrics, and the performance of it. So, how many singers can 8 shows a week just come out there and own that piece of material? It is a high wire act. So you're watching at the 11th hour in your musical a high wire act. It's unexpected. It's very much out of the blue. It's not something that it's not something that fills in any narrative gaps or that answers any questions. So for me, it's a rare, it's a rare moment in
Yeah, it really is.
theater history. And again, difficult to replicate. And I don't know that there are a lot of composers anymore who would have the power, if they had the skill, to replicate it, to get it past. Like I remember, when Honeymoon in Vegas came out, and there was an overture, and I remember thinking, I don't think there's any composer other than Sondheim now and Jason Robert Brown who'd be able to command an overture, like just an overture. And
Yeah.
I think that's where we are, and I think that's probably that's probably okay. But I don't think if you or I tried to write The Miller's Son and we did a good job of it, and we had the greatest, and my wife sang it, it was a great moment, but it had absolutely nothing to do with the show. I don't think there are a lot of commercial producers who would allow it, to go on, and we'd have a fight.
Yeah.
We'd have a fight on our hands. So that I think is the
Yeah.
difference. That I think is the fundamental difference between Omar Sharif, which is a central emotional piece of material and actually does address the one narrative interest we really have in the well, if we have a few in the band's visit, we want to know, is violence going to erupt? I mean, that's what's underneath the band's visit. And
Right.
then beyond that, the romance, how will the romance um find itself? How will they find each other? And so that song is very central
Right.
to the show. The Miller's Son
Oh,
is very tangential to the narrative of A Little Night Music, and yet is a virtuosic high wire act that really is so thrilling that it demands to be seen and to live. That's my take on that.
thank you. Thanks, David. Let's circle back to Dylan. You were starting to say something about Dylan's lyrics.
Yeah, which I agree, every word at a certain point in a lot of Dylan, and the oeuvre much better than I, because it's not really like other than Paul Simon and Sting, like for me, it was musical theater when I was a kid. Sting's another, I think, fantastic lyricist for pop music.
I really want I really want you to listen to some Joni Mitchell and some Elvis
Oh, and I
Costello.
do love Joni Mitchell. I do love Joni Mitchell,
Yeah.
and I love a lot of Elvis Costello. Don't know I know less of his work than I know of Dylan's even.
I mean, the problem with Dylan and Elvis Costello is they are so prolific. You know, Dylan has 55 records. It's hard to know which part of their career, like which songs. There's so much and so many, so much is rich, but there's a lot of throwaways. So, you know, it's hard.
What was the musical they just did with Dylan songs? Um,
Um, Girl from North Country.
yeah, The Girl from North Country, which I saw, which I
Yeah,
liked.
I
Um,
didn't.
and there were a lot of Dylan songs there that I had never heard. I didn't know. So I mean, I got more I got more Dylan than I'd had before. Again, it always comes down to um, putting it on a stage and putting it in a narrative and having it on a record where you can listen to it over and over again versus I'm hearing it for the first time in the theater. I get one shot at it. It has to
Yeah.
accomplish everything narratively, structurally, emotionally, character-wise, all at the same time, first time. Um,
Yeah.
and and so it's the schism between the words and the lyrics. As pop lyrics, they're great, Dylan. They function exactly as they need to. As theater lyrics, then you have to separate the
Yeah,
words,
they're
the
not,
content
I mean,
from the
I mean,
style, from the substance, the craft
this is a pet peeve.
from the
Sorry,
work.
David. This is a pet peeve of mine. Pop lyrics are not meant to be on stage. I mean, the reason Beautiful worked so brilliantly for me was that all of the songs were in context of recording them in the studio or performing them. They did short versions of them. It was about her life. They weren't trying to make the songs tell the story because these songs were not created to tell the story. You know, all of the pop geniuses that we love that have created these songs and the theatrical shows that have been built around them, some that have been more successful than others, all suffer from the same problem, which is that just what you said, these lyrics were not intended to be sung in theatrically. You know,
That's
they're
also
sung on stage singing and playing guitar, but they're not meant to
right.
move a story forward.
There's
They're
also
meant to evoke ideas and thoughts and emotions as any 3 or 4 minute song would.
there's also a pop musical problem, which is that pop songs tend to have gaps in them. They tend to be, ba 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 2 3 4 ba 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 2 3 4, or they have 8 beats in between lines. Like a lot of what happens when you put a
Nothing's
pop
written for the
song,
stage.
which, and I'm gonna give you a compliment, which is you're very good at understanding how to filter a pop music sensibility into a narrative Broadway style score, so that what you have to always be aware of is in a musical the thoughts just keep coming and you can't stop because you want the music to stop, and then because then you have to then put something in between those 8 beats, in between the first line and the second line and the third line and the fourth line, and you're very good at knowing, you have that inner sense of like what the pulse is, so that even if it's like a pop song, or don't go spreading rumors that we can that we should blah blah blah, don't go spreading rumors da 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 da, it keeps going, and that's something that when you try to just take, here's some hit pop songs, let's put them on a stage, you end up really treeing yourself, because you've tried to put something on stage that isn't stage worthy. It doesn't hold the audience's interest in between the gaps musically, aside from whatever you have going on lyrically, that is not connecting things either in rhyme scheme or in narrative development processes. So
That's
you
a,
have to have a sense of that.
that's a great point. And even Stephen Sondheim has suffered from this issue. I mean, we both read Sondheim and Company, and there's this great excerpt in Michael Bennett talking about follies. And I can't remember what song it was, but in one particular song that Sondheim wrote, he had a 4 bar or like a 2 or 3 bar gap. And Michael Bennett literally went, "What am I supposed to fucking do during this gap?" And it was like, and that taught Sondheim that, he was still learning. It
I
was,
remember that. I remember what
relatively new in his career, and it was like, oh yeah, I shouldn't do that. And I don't know what the song was, or what I think it was Beautiful Girls.
I feel like it
But
must have been Beautiful Girls. That's how I.
yeah, that's my memory, but it could have been something else. But the point is that, music sometimes dictates, I need to rest for these 2 bars. And so as a writer, what I do, because I'm very aware that you can't have these gaps. So what I will do if I'm writing a song and I need the gap musically, since I'm very often book writer, the co-book writer, I will add a line of dialogue, or I will add a stage direction, because reading that passage from Sondheim and Company about Michael Bennett and Stephen Sondheim,
Yeah,
I've always had that in my head.
yeah.
And even when I was working on Jane Eyre, when we were doing the song Forgiveness, where the music needed these pauses, but I was not comfortable with the emotionality that was happening in the lyric, and so I wrote little lines of dialogue for young Jane to ask the question that then Helen would answer in her line of dialogue, so that I could close that gap. And of course, Sondheim does that. I think that's what he learned, because he does that as well. And
But
I
it's
think,
harder. It's harder to do it in your pop genre songs than it is in like Jane Eyre. You have a lot more, it's more operatic. You have a lot more leeway to just like, I'm going to add these notes here. But like stuff that you've done in My Improbable Sisters, I'm just thinking about just like those songs they are so influenced by the pop era of, March 2nd, 1955, Montgomery, Alabama, Booker T, Washington High. I was coming home on the bus, just another day of high school. There really wasn't much to discuss. Sat myself down where I could. So far, so good. Felt so good. 1, 2, 3, 4. March. So the only gap is that 4 beats in between the first verse and the second verse. That's it. So you're really building something that's giving a pop music idiom, but really continuing to flow through the storytelling and the thoughts of that song. And it doesn't come, without some skill and some
but
craft.
and while I accept this compliment, um, let's talk about Bulldog, the first song in the show, where there are gaps. And I was not comfortable with those gaps. And so you and I added lines of dialogue in the verses. There's the
Correct.
chorus straight through.
Great example. Great example.
I can't even think of how the verse goes, but yeah. So it depends on the song, and I think
That's a really good example, Bulldog, because we'd talk and we'd laugh. He'd look at me cute, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We'd ba ba ba. I like
musically,
your 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that's what I'm talking about. Which
yeah,
if you can't have dialogue in between those sections, you're in a lot of trouble. And if every song did that, we'd be in a lot of
yeah.
trouble.
Musically, I did not want to fill that gap musically. I wanted that air, and I was fine with that air until we got into rehearsal.
Yeah,
And as soon as we got into rehearsal, I went, no, I
yeah,
can't. And
no,
then
that's
we
right.
started writing lines to fill it up. But it's also that we understand that
Yeah.
that's what you need to do. I want to come back to one final point, and then I know we've probably
Oh yeah.
talked enough. But I thought it was interesting what you were saying about Omar Sharif and when it was cut, and that you don't miss a song when it's cut because it's chiseled away. But I had a very different experience in Jane Eyre. With Jane Eyre, I will just say we had a lot. I mean, it took a long time to get to Broadway. It took 10 years. And along the way, we did a lot of readings, we did a lot of workshops, we did La Jolla, we did Canada, we did a bunch of things. And we had a lot of people with a lot of opinions. And we ended up making a lot of changes for Broadway that where we threw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
And we cut we murdered some darlings that we should not have murdered, that I knew at the time we shouldn't have murdered. But, it was an overwhelming time. Things were happening fast. But I was very conscious of a few melodies and a few songs that absolutely were imperative that needed to be in the show. And I was also aware of a few melodies that absolutely no longer should be in the show, that never needed to be heard again. And it was really frustrating not being able to make those changes on Broadway. But in the ensuing 10 years, John and I have continued to be working on the show. And I will say that it's being licensed, the new version, a chamber version, is being licensed by MTI this year. And it has given John and I, and me especially, the opportunity musically to go back and find these melodies that we threw out arbitrarily. The show was so long,
Right.
and we were focusing on, in my opinion, the wrong things. And so I think Omar Sharif is an amazing example of a song that was cut loose from a show that never should have been cut loose, and a composer wise enough to understand how necessary that song was to the storytelling. And whether it was musically and lyrically or just one or the other doesn't matter. And that the team recognized
Yeah.
the voice of the composer and lyricist to go, well, if you feel really strongly about this, let's put it back in. And I wish that I had that. I wish that I was allowed that grace in some of the projects that I've been working on. But now, we're older and we have a little more weight to us. I'm able to be a little stronger and stand up for myself a little more than I was when I first got to Broadway, and I was just surrounded by people that had way more experience than me. So I didn't really know what I was doing.
Well, I think, and I have a story about that too, but I think the point is if you miss it, if you find yourself missing it, you should pay attention to that feeling. If within a few days, your loss over having murdered that darling is gone and you feel like, oh, actually I'm fine, I'm not thinking about it anymore. But if you are, or if it comes back, that's something to pay attention to. And I think what's instructive in that story is, and in your story here too, is pay attention to the stuff you miss. Because if you miss it, there probably is a reason why. And there may be an application for it later. And then I have just a similar story, although it wasn't a song, it was a scene. I'd written for Motown, I'd written a scene, I had imagined a scene for Marvin Gaye and Berry Gordy when Marvin Gaye leaves him, which wasn't in any book and had never been dramatized at all. But I imagined at some point Marvin Gaye had a conversation with Berry Gordy about leaving Motown. So I wrote that scene. I won't get into the details. There's a lot about that scene and a lot about that story, but it was the first day I met Brandon Victor Dixon, who played Berry Gordy, was in the first day of rehearsal, and he bolted across the room when he saw me and gave me a big hug, and he was holding that scene in his hand. And over the year or two that we were working on the show, at a certain point, Barry would end up cutting everything. And at one point, he ended up cutting that scene. And it was really, we all missed it. Everyone missed it. But we really missed it was Brandon. Oh, speaking of which, my wife.
Hi, Polly.
Hi, Ernie.
Bye, baby.
I love you.
Have a great day. Anyway, special guest.
I know. You never know when they're going to pop it.
It was actually Brandon who missed it more than anyone. And he actually went to Barry and said, so I've just kind of been, playing with rewriting, a scene for me and Marvin. And he basically just put my scene back in the show. And
I always find that when I'm working with the director, my voice is meaningless. But when the lead actor goes to the director, that's when I get things done. All right, final quick story, the opposite story. One day, who knows, I was working on Jane Eyre and I decided to cut Secret Soul and Brave Enough for Love, the
Wow,
two most popular
smart.
songs of the show. I don't know, I was just reading the script and I felt like they were a little schmaltzy or something.
Wow, we're gonna remember this. I did not know this, and
Yeah, no,
I'm
I'm
so gonna
saying it.
throw this back at you.
Oh, no, you don't have to because John Caird has never let me forget this moment. It was just one day. It was just like one script. I was probably high. I was just like, yeah, I don't need this. Yeah, I don't need this. And I said the script,
Oh,
and he has never, ever, ever let me forget that I did that.
can't blame him.
And no, I do not think those are the two best songs in the score. However, with that said, I like those songs. They should be in the show.
They should be in the show. I'm actually really going to throw that back in your face when you were working on something and you're saying, this song is like, the hit song of the show. We should just cut. We don't need. It's like, Paul, we don't need any of it. We could just go home. We could spare ourselves a job. We could take a job at Costco stocking the shelves. We don't need to do any of this.
Yeah, I like to show my weaknesses, because mostly I am always right,
Yeah,
but occasionally
yeah.
I am wrong.
Listen,
And when I'm wrong,
yeah,
I like to say I'm wrong.
one time in 25 years, Paul, it's not bad. It's not a bad record. It's not bad at all. So next week, we still have to talk about the Rico song from Little Torrit, which
Well, you better come in better prepared next
I
time,
know.
Mr. David.
I was on another call on another project, and I got
That's okay. When you told me that you would be 10 minutes, I wanted to see if I could play a guitar part, record a guitar part really fast, and I did. I recorded a guitar part in 10 minutes. Thank you.
You're an amazing man. You really are. And we still have to talk about which I only referenced now from A Little Night Music, which it's just as lyrically we have to go through it like that I think we just have to go through.
And what I would like to talk about next week is inspired shows versus non-inspired shows written by the same writers.
Okay.
Like writers work that, oh my God, they were so inspired when they wrote this one. Yeah, not so much when they wrote this one.
That happens.
Which happens to great writers, which happens to all writers. And I would just like to announce who those writers are, point and laugh at them, just as a way of working out my own shit.
Your demons. Sure.
By the way, last thing I want to say is that, I'm wrong about a lot of things.
Yeah.
But I wasn't wrong about this.
Okay, that's all I have time for today.
All right. See you later. Hey, thanks for joining us. We'll be here all week.
My Favorite Sings with David Goldsmith and Paul Gordon is a production of Virtual Stage Lab. Virtual Stage Lab was founded to create film captures of original musicals and plays to democratize how theater gets developed, seen, produced, and licensed for production. If you have a favorite sing from a musical that you'd like to have David and Paul discuss, break down, and analyze, please contact our Director of Marketing, Melody Munitz, at virtualstagelab@gmail.com. For more information and our catalog of original projects by Paul Gordon and David Goldsmith and others, go to www.virtualstagelab.com. Main title parody lyrics written and performed by David Goldsmith. End title music by Paul Gordon from the Gordon and Goldsmith musical My Improbable Sisters, starring Jenna Lee Rosen and Tony Award nominee Jasmine Amy Rogers, now available to stream for free on the Virtual Stage Lab page on YouTube. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please like, comment, and share on social media. Thank you for listening. Welcome to the community. This has been My Favorite Sings, a practically perfect, not at all corny title. Title under protest by Paul Gordon.